就是你说我吗？你就能看到那个，然后我对，但是它不是直播，它有延迟。比如说我现在说的话，我估计一会儿才能传到那个 YouTube 上。然后我试一下，你看看卡不卡？感觉还好。拿话筒说。Hello。好，能听到是吗？行，行，我昨天试，反正收音什么都没问题，但是对延迟应该没事儿。对但是我换了个网，现在感觉还行。刚才那个网实在是不行。对，这个网可以，我刚才用的楼上的网。但是我估计拍那个嘉宾就不好拍了。但是他怎么导到这个里面就不好办了。就是导到这个，把他的那个视频信号导入到这个配流里。不是，等一下，你刚才说你那个摄像头不能拍嘉宾是吧？就是也能拍，但是效果就不是很好。效果不好就不拍了。对，我觉得直接网上的人可能，对，我觉得主要就是分享给他说清楚就行。因为等一下那个对谈的时候，你不是还要拍人吗？大家看人的时候对谈不是没有人咋看人的，传死。对，我朋友他们行。对，对谈的时候我切成拍嘉宾的模式。对啊。现在主要还没人。是的，是都在一个画面里，但是，就是我到时候从我这个电脑上，就是源头切一下。第一部分只 share 这个屏幕就好，第二部分的话，我等到他们进入下一个环节，然后需要嘉宾或者主持人的就对话的时候，我把它切成摄像头，所以还是在 YouTube 这个里面，所以没什么问题。
切都成，我这边只要给我这边一个画面就可以了。我这边推上流之后就不动，就全都是那边动就好了。我这边已经开始推了，效果都挺好的，没什么问题。
Hello， 测试一下看。Hello， 测试一下，看看能不能听到声音。我这边国内小伙伴看一下卡不卡，或者是流畅不流畅。
宝瑞，你那边的画面没有了，现在是黑屏了啊。
对的，我刚才切掉了，我也把它这个画面弄成一个咱的 logo 了。但是声音没什么问题吧？
那个声音的话，我看你那块是有音响的吧？你把音响开开，完了再说几句话，我听听声音效果。
Hello， 能听到吗？我现在用的就是它这边的麦克，然后，一会儿嘉宾的话估计也是这个状态，他就会站到，就是我现在这个位置，然后对着屏幕，然后用麦克，然后他有可能会走动一下，但是他的那些操作可能都还是在电脑附近。你国内同时看一下效果怎么样？目前看来都还挺好的。
声
Hello Hello， 现在声音怎么样？我感觉我刚才说话声音比较小。那我等一下，到时候提醒这个嘉宾，让他靠近电脑一些，这样效果会好一些。对，我是用他这儿麦克说的，现场的话效果还挺好的。OK， 明白。我等一下，还有一个问题就是，等一下那个嘉宾对谈的时候，那个收音状况，稍等一下吧。然后咱们测一下那个的状况，我看看我坐哪儿，然后拍他两个，这样好。然后应该就完事儿了。方便坐哪儿呢？
是个什么目的？
对，就是我想拍一下，
感受一下这个结果是吧？
对，我就拍一下看看。就坐下就好。我看看一会儿在这边。我先开个门。Hello。Hello。来这么久？我在。
还没有呢，我7月4号才去。我现在当模特儿嘛。
所以你是 host 吗？
啊？
可一姐呢？
可一姐在忙别的去。
用不用再近一些？
哇，你们这个好高级，这是什么工具？
就想直播一下。一会儿我就坐这儿。然后说句话试试。随便讲讲。
Are you okay? Hello。哎，你好。
你好。
今天天气不错啊。
是啊，说出来了。
哎呦，这叫多好听！现在孩子就是会说。
现在这个效果怎么样？我在那边看。
我去，有人在看。
有人在，没事。我有一个同事。
哦。
我就主要是。
您好。
你试一下说话，然后看看能不能听到。主要我怕这个说话到时候听不见。或者我说。啊？或者我做这个。
喂，你好。
Hello。
然后要达到什么效果？它是通过麦克传到别的地方。
从麦克，就是你这个声音直接传到电脑里。
传电脑里面。
对。
没问题啊，听得到吗？
对，我正在等他们反馈。
哦，那简单的很。
对，再讲几句麦，我也拿个麦。
我觉得这个声音还挺好的。
对。
应该没什么问题吧。
Hello。
麦克。
这个不好使是吗？哎，也行。
可以的，要这样对着他讲。所以说。
Hello，现在能听清吗？ 如果差不多一会儿大概就这样布置，然后
test，
对 check， 然后一会儿第一部分用那个 share screen， 第二部分就用这个。因为一会儿我也不知道咱的环节，但是好像第二部分是一个对谈。
是的，吧。
你看哪那么多话？
演习，这是演习。
行，一会儿我可能不一定能这么精确了，但是大概只要收音好，我觉得就行。
说得好。那上不是有绿色的进度条吗？能够看到咱们的声音大小。
往右移一点点，看一下。
王老师，你在多久了？
我明天
现在怎么样？
你来干嘛？
我来陪可一姐玩一玩。然后和理想哥交流一下。
我估计，因为这个电脑一会儿我还要搬走，所以没法固定下来。但是估计大概就这样吧，反正现场的时候再慢慢调整吧。行。
用的什么平台？
用的叫 OBS。我也不。行了，走了。
谢谢，没问题，不客气。机器你是哪过来的？
我在那上班，我从家里来的。
找什么？
在这3个。
邮笔什么时候来？
这个应该是咱说了算，所以他占不占都无所谓。然后反正我先把电脑充满电吧，然后一会儿的话应该就不插电了，应该就这样。OK， 应该没问题。我把那个凳子往后放一下。你帮忙吗？不用，你看你要叫你带你就带。叫你带4个的这个摆那儿啊。分汤可以，就用一个。不是，我的意思是你把它给2节堆起来就可以了，把它给插起来，就是3个都插起来就可以了。3个那么长？不要3个那么长，不要3个那么长。你再往上拉。
那行吧，这个。
其实还好，就也没多少东西，还好。
是吗？我也
不用说了解的非常深才能写，就比较稍微了解点就行。
就是他只要能听得懂，他不需要。
就怎么好，只要能找到这个东西之前怎么好就行。
但是因为我看他们报道其实都很专业嘛。
对，我觉得挺那个。
对，我以为是。
那需要慢慢积累。
那他写英文报吗？
写中英文都写。
那他英语很好啊。
还好，对，人家学这个现在。
哇塞，那小苏老师好牛啊！就是他写的就跟那个，就是学的这个方向的。
对。
哇塞，这小苏老师写的。是什么？就是说他们这边有真人，就是他们这些之前的报道都是小苏老师在写。除了小苏老师，还有其他人不能是一个人写的吗？
但是我们都写了，但是他那边比较多了。
小苏老师好牛啊！哎，你之前是跟戴文一起工作过吗？
没有，就是
因为认识。对，还认识戴文呢。靠。
戴文。
我一把戴文拉进全是 也就来了20个，意思就是来了5倍。不，我的意思是他外面就来了20个，加上我们的这个15个人，一共有35个人。35个人现场看就还可以，就不是很尴尬。
主要这个人也不多吧。
那你把2个一起宣传吧，因为有的时候你放到群里面，那个群有在中国的，有在美国的，就大家选，就是如果是国内，你就不要只放YouTube，你找一下斗鱼，就之前你给我的那个。
对，那个我得再测试一下，因为YouTube这个很变了，但是现在我是不会再动了，所以应该是。
哦，那你修改一下你的那个，就是比如说直播，先把直播那个放下，然后你没有更新的大概是，比如说头一张。就是因为你放很多微信群，他们控制。
我又加了个网人，我就是谁的嘛？哎呀，这个也很尴尬。但是应该是对的。这个给我提供的，这个不行。
我们不要叫为什么？
对呀，我就说嘛。因为我确实也跟很多朋友也有放弃。
没有吗？
啊？
你在说什么？
那个不知道叫什么大型嘛？微信里头，
你要来啥？
意思啊？ How would you know? I mean, why would you think so? मेरे लैपटॉप पर तो किस नंबर 666 लास्ट में 20566 टेबल्स एक्चुअली इसके बाद भी जब मैं दूसरी स्क्रीन से कनेक्ट करूँगा तो बहुत ऑप्शन दिखते हैं
哎，你好。
可能得麻烦用我这个电脑来讲。你能
方
便方便把 PPT 拷给我吗？
可以啊，没问题啊。
然后
那你这可以不可以 AirDrop 还是什么
？AirDrop 可以。
你这把先量一下。
然后行，就直接拷给我。然后因为我这边直播，
在录直播，
对直播什么都弄好。
哇，你们都
哇，太棒了。
对，然后
直播一边在录音的，
对对对，
就都在直播。
最好用这个。
对，这个是你的。
好，谢谢。
直接 AirDrop。
看一下啊，给你 drop， 找对了文件，给你 drop。
感谢，辛苦了。我是代表机器之心这边过来的。对，
好，谢谢。
举办这个活动。
AirDrop， 再打开一个吧。这边打开。我得连一下网先，这个网是哪个呀？
网是 VGC Gas，
这你的
已经连上了，直接拖。我会帮你连一下我。
好。
有声音吗？咱这个有声音啊。这个播放的话，应该没问题。会有一些视频什么的吗？
对。
OK。行，反正
咱们试试吧。
行，可以试。这边还没收呢，不着急。
现在可以了。
OK， 行。
你最好看一下那个声音怎么样？
行，我刚才调试这些麦克什么，目前是没问题的。我就把咱这个放桌面了。
可以啊。
就在这个，然后咱先试一下。可能我得问一下他们有没有 clicker，
这无所谓。
今天我是没带啊。
没事，这无所谓。我那个有一个那个指标，鼠标。
行，或者您就直接就左右对，在这儿讲，然后
投影和那个直播是怎么着？
直播我已经不用管，我就已经分享屏幕了。
已经分享屏幕了。
因为这个太亮了。
对，本来是想直接录，但是感觉效果看不清。
太白了，而且它这边一关灯就全部关掉，它没有分层的。
行，没事。你要是那个录屏幕的话，那等于你就得 mirror 一下了哈。
对，已经这些都弄好了。对。
行，好嘞。
都弄好了。
那行，那咱们最好看一下那个声音，声音
是不是太黑了？
可以开一些，其实，但是您来找一下声音在。
声音在后面。这个
可以连，这个是不是要连？
它连啊，在这儿啊，不是在这儿吗？你赶紧连。你有转接头吗？我给我看。
你要没有的话，我也有。
我有。找一下。我以为他会能就直接。
行，挺好。
声音也可以。
声音可以啊。
这个话筒是可以的，我试过。
对，话筒没问题。
对。哎，你幸好带了转接头，我觉得要是没有带我就晕了。就很想试。
这个转接口现在是越来越 popular 了。
对，这个要开一下吗
？I don't know， 我觉得应该 suppose 它是 default 开的吧，要不然我得找他们人啊。看一下，我觉得它是开的。
他们人在吗？我这边。
好像是有点亮。
对，那你等一下好不好？你先等一下，我帮你。
那咱们先试一下。
你先试一下。
你先试一下声音。
对，声音就直接播放就好。
So I invited a few of the world's best hackers to try to hack me and show me where my vulnerabilities are. And now I'm going to meet them in Las Vegas for DEF CON, the biggest hacker convention of the year. They're going to hack me using social engineering, which is
essentially hacking without any code. They just use a phone and an internet connection.
You want to do a sample?
因为这个可能
Phishing is voice solicitation.
刚才话筒它连接的音频输入是话筒上，我不知道是不是要改成这个上面，但是可以等它确认一下。
没事，实在不行，不行，这个
没办法，
还没有，
有遥控器吗？遥控器，有遥控器就。
我上次来它是这个。
这个是吧？
嗯。
那我
你试试吧。
OK。
你不行，我赶紧找人去。啊
？Always a fun process.
This is not your first time here, right?
Second time.
Oh, the first time was
when,
Leo.
Leo was here. Yes.
Yeah, I remember that time.
啊，现在好像亮了。
OK 吗？
但是有个啥灯亮了。
我不行，我去找。
哎，好像有东西了。不错，我放一下啊。
And basically, what you do is you use the phone.
可以。
To extract information.
All right. 可以了，可以了。那怎么着？现在是放还是怎么着？是？
那我先放到这个 PPT 第一页吧。
你先放到 PPT 第一页吧。
OK。然后等一下开始。像这个可能您得注意一下这个线，别绊着。
没事。
对，我放包那儿。啊。
这个 PPT 做的还是反差蛮大的，所以这个稍微差一点也还好。
对，您这个挺清楚的。
行，好，你测试一下
confirm 一下
，confirm 一下好。
对，链接已经推好了。
行，好。
OK， 没什么问题，就是稍微有些延迟。然后国内斗鱼应该。
然后麦克呢？是哪个？
麦克您都可以啊，这两个。
行，我就随便拿一个。
对，给您看一下。
这个。对。好，行。
不着急。
不着急。
对，可以再，您可以去喝点水。
行，好。
对，咱们一会儿塞好。
Thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks for being with us.
It was a pleasure. I gotta ask, how much time do I have? All right. We have an hour or so. At least. You should be able to leave some time for Q&A.
Yeah, the event ends at 8:30.
8:30. Okay. Let me go ask the organizer how much time I have. Maybe make it longer or shorter. 对呀，对呀。Oh, yeah. Hi. Yeah, David. Okay, ठीक है.
If I want to be able to extract information about a thing from this web page that wasn't designed specifically to do that, it's just kind of a text web page. What is the approach that you recommend for doing that?
So it really depends on whether people want to crawl or don't want to crawl.
They don't care.
So just like first piece, anything you should look at the robot like DXC, right? You know, like because that's just the etiquette of the web, right? You know, some of the websites they don't want you to crawl, they will put in some particular statement in robot.txt. Yes. So considering that if they allow you to crawl, right? There are two type of things you could be looking at, right? If it's just the text, right? In text form, ASCII form, it's a lot easier. You know, use Python, beautiful soup, a package in Python.
Beautiful soup?
Yes, beautiful soup is a package in Python that's pretty easy to use, and you just call down the page and then parse it. I mean, all the web pages is just a set of HTML or XML. It's basically some kind of hierarchical data structure. And usually you'll be able to do that pretty easily. But now, if you don't want to crawl, there was all sorts of like JavaScript, pictures in there.
This isn't a situation where we don't.
Alright. So
but even in the case of this beautiful soup, I mean, that's not specifically for extracting, you know, dates and stuff, is it?
No, I mean, that's just a specific thing, right?
Yeah.
So you have to like regular expressions, looking for the field names, looking for the tags, etc.
So I use regular expressions, looking for like a long person.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Hey, just before we start, I just want to have a quick assessment of like what the audience are like. Well, it's great, you know. How many people have done some form of data science before? All right, yes. Really big audience here. And how many people have touched some parts of the financial services in their work experience before? All right, good, really good. So I'll be more leaning towards the technology side and sharing a bit more about the financial industry side. What about other industries? What other industries are people working in? Ad tech? Anybody working in the advertisement technology space? E-commerce, perhaps? Any other industries? Care to name? Which industries? Manufacturing, that's great. Chip design, yes. You know, I used to do chip design. So, search. All right. Yeah, I used to do search.
Yeah, you're a professor.
Yeah. All right.
Professor Trump, yeah. So we're going to start in 5 minutes, okay?
Any other industries? FinTech. All right. Any other industries? Security? Great. Oh, that's a really great industry to be in now. Okay. What about industry? Which industry? Tuning. Okay. Optimization. Algorithms. That's great. Yeah. Anybody else? Any other industries? Yeah.
Designing hardware chips.
Hardware chips.
Yeah.
Yes. Chip design. All right. You got a colleague over there.
I think it's time to start. So first, I would like to thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. for our first episode of DTalk. So what is the DTalk? As you can tell from the name, DTalk is the place we're talking about data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. And DTalk is initiated by Talking Data and Sync, 机器之心. So Talking Data is the leading data intelligence solution provider with the smart data platform as a core of the data intelligence application ecosystem. Talking Data empowers enterprises and also helps them to achieve the data-driven digital transformation. And Sync, 机器之心 is the China media reporting on this artificial intelligence and machine technology related. I think a lot of you people heard about 机器之心 before, right? And also follow the WeChat account, official account, and also follow the media blog from the Sync. And Sync also provides excellent content of this cutting-edge technologies. So why we come up with this DTalk today is we want to create the data science community where we could, the people can share what they learn and learn from each other. So in the future, we're going to invite the KOLs from different areas like the security, AI, and data science education, etc. And they will bring the cutting-edge technology to all of you guys. And we have our Slack community. And when you leave this, when we finish today's event, you can scan the QR code on our poster, and we will put you guys into our Slack event, to our Slack community. And after this event finish, we can share the PPT slides and also the video record to all of you guys. So tonight, it's our honor to invite Dr. Chong, who is the Chief Data Science from Equinox. And he has a really long years, like more than 10 years experience in AI application in fintech. So let's welcome Dr. Chong and hope you guys enjoy tonight's venture. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I've been to another talk here last time when actually the CEO of Talking Data was here. And it's always a pleasure to be back here and talking to everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about this topic, deploying AI in mobile-first, customer-facing financial product. There's a lot of qualifiers there. Why is there so much qualifier there? Well, you know, the industry, the financial industry is changing very fast. It used to be the brick-and-mortar kind of stores that you only go to once a month. Now, you know, there's financial services in everybody's pocket, and any kind of time you get a check, well, if you're still getting a check, you can actually scan it, and you don't have to go to the brick-and-mortar stores. And if anyone has been to China recently, you know, even the street vendors don't use cash anymore. Like you have a 2D barcode there, and you know, like even when you're getting something as simple as dumplings or something on the street, they don't handle cash. You just scan the 2D barcode and you get paid, and it's a very fluid and low friction environment. And in that environment, what can be built on top of is all these layers of financial services, not just transactions, but also financial products, and to serve all kinds of financial needs. Just last year, a insurance company went public, Zhong'an 保险, right? Zhong'an, the company. And it's actually one of the leading companies in internet finance, internet insurance really, but also domain internet finance. And it's creating like billions of transactions, but each worth sometimes less than 1 yuan. But that's the epitome of how we're using internet technologies to its best when the marginal cost of each individual transaction tends to zero, and how you can serve mass needs with these particular technologies. So with that, let me get started. Talking about internet finance, you can't get away from internet or finance, right? Internet, as we know it today, over the past 30 years, have sifted into every cracks in the fabric of society. Right? Anything you do now has an internet version of it. Whether it's proliferated or not yet, it's got a version there. And the same thing with finance. Finance, well, has a much longer history. So if you look at the history of financial systems, it goes not just all the way back 200 years, be it Adam Smith or the original banks in China in Shanxi province, right? Where the idea of the banks initiated in China. It actually goes all the way back to the Babylon times, where in the spring there are people with the grain as seeds, and there are the people without. And you actually have forms of lending, right? People with seed would lend the seed to others without the seed, and they would do the planting, and at harvest time they would return the portion of their grain as seed to the lenders. And even back then, you have all these criteria for lending, right? If you're deciding who to give your precious grain to in the spring to be able to collect on that in the fall, you might be looking at who's got the land, who's got the irrigation systems or technology, or who's got the strength or the cattle to be able to do the planting, right? Very much the same as today, if you think about it, the ability and willingness to pay when you have an online loan. So a lot of these ideas goes all the way back. But now, why are we talking about AI in finance today? It's because this data, AI, and models. So just in the past 20 years, you have a great aggregation of all kinds of data. Not just data in the financial system, but the data in people's everyday lives. And the data that is collected online and offline about people's behavior. And for AI, that's the past 5-10 years. Really, that when it became a term that everybody on the street you can hear and understand. And then the models. Well, the models is still something that only few can really understand, but everybody probably understands the concept of model, which is really looking at past behavior to predict future trends, right? So it's those kind of capabilities that are now beginning to proliferate in the industry. And for today, I'm going to be talking about 2 cycles. And those 2 cycles would have the specific opportunities where we're working towards this mission that I'm going to be talking about very soon. So with that, I just want to give a real quick introduction about myself. My name is Jika Chong. I am currently the Chief Data Scientist for a company called Acorns. It's a micro investment company that's aiming to help the masses. We're helping the up-and-coming to start with micro investing to be able to be of help to themselves in their future. What does that mean? Well, today, if you look at today's generation, the millennial generation, if you would, with the advancement of health technology, right? Everybody probably will have a chance to live until when they're 100. That's really scary. You know why? Because you're going to be working for 40 years and living on what you earned for 80 years. Think about that. Yeah, that's a pretty daunting task for today's generation, right? It's a very different situation compared to the previous generations where the life expectancy is probably 70-some-year-old, 80-some-year-old, right? So, with that, it's becoming so important to start early with the investing process. And we're using all sorts of ways, not just AI, not just machine learning, but also behavior science, to be able to help people start that process early, that saving and investing process early. So before that, I was working at Credit Ease, their subsidiary called Ear and Die, It is the first online peer-to-peer lending company to go public on the New York Stock Exchange, and that was in 2015, and they're still doing pretty okay today. And before that, I was working at a search engine, job search engine. See, there's someone from search engine field here today. So back then, this was from 2012 to 2015 timeframe. It's right at the time when U.S. was recovering from the financial crisis, and it was really a pleasure to have been in that situation at a job search engine, where we're helping people find the job they love. And as their head of data science, I'm actually seeing how the recovery of the industry is going at the front seat, really. And it's also then when I was also invited to the White House a few times to advise on AI and machine learning technologies for helping the U.S. population get back to work. And before that, I worked also at Silver Lake, a private equity firm, where I also saw the importance of investing and evaluating how to distribute resources to the opportunities that's most suitable for generating return. Currently, I'm teaching at Tsinghua University a course on using the quantitative approaches for assessing creditworthiness for online platforms. And I also taught at Carnegie Mellon and spent some time at Carnegie Mellon and Berkeley for my undergrad and PhD years. So with that, I want to start with our questions about the background, the mission of what would we use internet finance to do? Well, to me, internet finance, the purpose of it is democratizing the democratization of personalized financial services whenever and wherever they're needed. So the keywords there is personalized, so that it's not just one product for the masses, but really serving your need. And also keywords there is whenever and wherever, enabled by the mobile platform. So looking at that mission, we have to take a quick look at what is financial services. So the fundamental three areas for financial services is really these three areas: saving, lending, and transferring. And if you think about all the financial services that you use, it pretty much lands in one of these three. And there are some emergent areas like insurance, which are sort of combinations of these, if you would. But if we look at the past 30 years or so, 20, 30 years or so, what we're seeing is that there's a lot of trial and errors, a lot of specific companies that came and went. Some names that you might still recognize, like Alipay and PayPal, and E-Trade, right? But they all have some connections to these basic financial services, but using the internet platform to make them easier to use or reach more people. It's actually only in the past 10 years or so when, at the bottom, you see this peer-to-peer lending, P2P lending piece emerging. What do you think is the reason why they emerged so late? Any? Yes? Infrastructure, yeah.
Smartphones.
Smartphones, yes. All that. What else? Yes, so all those, infrastructure and smartphones, but that's only one component. One of the things that makes them complicated is that they are actually a combination of three fundamental services: saving, lending, and transferring. So you have to have a service that does the saving. You have to aggregate the fund, right, from individuals. You have to have a platform, a matching platform for transferring that to people who need the money. And you have to do the customer acquisition for the borrowing side. You have to find who's actually looking for funds to borrow at a particular point in time. So because it has to combine all three fundamental services, it's actually a really complex business model to run. So regardless of which particular business model you look at, there are actually some commonalities. Well, the commonality that I would propose people you can think about is these two cycles. One is for customer acquisition, and the other is for customer retaining or sustaining, right? Really, like this is broadly applicable for a lot of industries, not just the financial industry. But in the financial industry, especially from mobile computing or mobile internet finance, this has some really interesting implications and opportunities. So one of the implications, if you look at today, like in 2018, is in the customer acquisition piece. So if you were here, if we were here 5-10 years ago, customer acquisition would have been pretty straightforward. Why is that? Anybody care to comment? Why is like 5-10 years ago customer acquisition would be easy?
Less choice.
Huh?
Less choice. They don't have so many choices.
Yes, less choice, definitely. And anybody looks at the Merrimaker's Internet Trend report? Huh? Yeah.
I guess more localized.
Uh-huh. Yeah, more localized, yes. So there's a lot of services locally, definitely. Anybody else? There's this one key trend from this year's report that's different from all previous years' report. Mobile devices has been increasing in the world consumption or world on a world basis, right? Throughout the world, if you look at the number of mobile devices, the number of mobile devices deployed has been increasing for the past N number of years until this year. This year, the increase is 0%. Yeah. So ever since actually 2015, the rate of increase has been like less than 10%. But this year it crossed 0%. And that has grave implications for customer acquisition because now you're gone from a high growth market or platform to a saturating market. So the techniques that one would use for customer acquisition will change dramatically. Now, of course, this is worldwide, right? You know, in U.S. and China, yes, it is saturating, but for a lot of countries, like in Africa and in other countries, there's still good growth. But overall, we're seeing this saturation of the market. And one of the things we need to do in that situation is this lowering of transaction friction. So if there are 10 different services that's providing you these convenience anytime, anywhere, which one would you choose? Most people would choose the simplest one to sign up for and the simplest one to use, right? So that's the first cycle. And then let's look at the second cycle. Well, for the second cycle, people have been looking at financial services as transactions, right? The more transactions you have, the more profit you have, the more money you earn, right? But continually, there's more and more choices that customers have. So if you're charging a lot for some particular services, like in US, just for overdraft fees, that is a $16 billion revenue for the financial industries. If you keep charging people overdraft fees, how do you think people would feel? That's actually, big area where new financial service companies are emerging to make aware of all these fees that banks charge and to be able to have innovative, more user-friendly services to displace them. And that's actually a really scary thing for the incumbents. So customer sustaining is an important cycle. And in there, the main goal is assure sustainability of services. And what does that mean for financial services? We'll go into more details to discuss. But if we're looking at the specific areas where AI could be of help, we're talking about data source innovation, we're talking about precision conversion, we're talking about exhaust data utilization, and I'm going to go into more details about those. And then for customer sustaining, we're talking about profitability, self-protection, and long-term trust that you can build with the customers. And if you can manage those two cycles well, that means you're going to have an improved business model or improved business performance. All right, so we talked about the two cycles here. Let's talk about the mission, right? And how it houses these 6 different opportunities. So keep in mind, we're talking about democratization of personalized financial services whenever and wherever they're needed. And to that end, what kind of specific opportunities in AI that we can use to run those cycles and make sure those flywheels would accelerate over time. So first one, let's look at data source innovation. So this is already a really important area that many people have focused on in Southeast Asia and in many other countries, and in the US and in Europe. There's also increasing recognition that this is a treasure trove of data, but we need to be more concerned about GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, right, the privacy aspect of things. But if you are able to provide a piece of service that is so valuable to people, then it's actually still possible to have people release these type of information in exchange for extreme source of help at time of emergency. So what sort of data source are we talking about? Well, on the mobile phone that you have in your pocket today, right? You have your IP addresses used, telephone number used, device fingerprints, geographic coordinates that you've been to, apps installed, account associated with the device that you log in from, your address book, and your device associated attributes like what Wi-Fi SSID you have pinged, what Bluetooth you are usually pairing, like devices or people with similar GPS tracks. And as long as you have valuable service and the customers can authorize those usage, they can actually be used to simplify a lot of product flows. So for example, I just noticed a few weeks ago that in my Bank of America app, right, they have a pop-up, hey, if you're traveling a lot, you know, we can use your geo information to automatically unlock your international travel, recognize you're traveling internationally so that you will be declined less often when you're traveling. Right? And that's a cool service that I think it would be useful for me. You know, it decreases a lot of embarrassing moments when I'm abroad. And also, you know, Bank of America would also, on the other hand, know that I'm a frequent international traveler. But hey, sometimes I'm willing to pay that cost to have them know about that in order for them to provide a service for me. So with these amount of information, right, there's so much you can do. Right? In terms of personalization, there is the simple recency, frequency monetization models. There's a content-based filtering models, matrix categorization, as well as deeper learning models. And all those models you can use to do these many look-alike algorithms, and you can enable a lot of intelligent services. But there is actually significant barriers to utilize all those data. So just take something really simple, a set of GPS coordinates, right, longitude, latitudes. Well, there's actually a lot of noise in that data. Depending on how you arrive at that data, there's at least 4 types of ways to get to the longitude-latitude data, right? It could be from your reception tower coordinates, like triangulation from your cell phone service provider. It could be from your GPS, which sometimes is actually not very reliable, especially if you're in Boston, for example, when there's a lot of tunnels there. And it could be from your Wi-Fi link, because you can use Wi-Fi triangulation to figure out approximately where you are, and like many other ways that you can get that kind of information, or IP address, for example. But if you're in a Starbucks, we're out of luck, because all communications in that you use in Starbucks hotspots go through one particular IP address. So everybody in Starbucks seems to be coming from the same place. So there are all those characteristics about these data, and there is actually a lot of domain expertise that's required. So if you're in China, actually, Talking Data, which is a plug for them, right? They have actually some particular technologies you can use to interpret a lot of these information. If you're in the US, there's Bing API and other APIs that you can check with disambiguating these longitude, latitude, and provide additional point of interest information so they can actually understand, are you in a rural area, in a wilderness, or in a metropolitan area with a lot of point of interest around you. Good. So that is the first piece where AI can be of help. Then there is the second piece, precision conversion. So what do I mean by precision conversion? Well, it's really about the segmentation of data streams. So there's something interesting about the mobile revolution that the traditional website type of revolution doesn't quite give you. When you're accessing web online, like using machines, usually you have these spots where you can do that, right? Like in your home, office, and a few other places. But for the mobile devices, you could be doing that anywhere, anytime. And what you can sync to is all these mobile devices and any kind of device fingerprinting that allows you to connect a lot of disparate sessions together to understand how the sequence of transactions or information would connect together to give you an overview of what the person is like and what their preferences are. So, and also in the financial industry, that also follows you now. Like we all probably have multiple credit cards nowadays. So for each individual financial transaction, you may know only a facet of your life. And you can see all the deals that they give you, right? That they're all trying to take a larger share of your wallet. But there are services like Acorns, Mint. In China, it's like Yao, Xinka, and Watsai. They're actually aggregators of a person's financial information. And with that aggregation, we can actually, based on their brand and their customer base, we can see certain preferences about these customers. So for example, for Mint and Watsai, it's like people who tend to like accounting or at least don't mind it, so they want to see all their money in the same place, right? For Acorns and Xinka, and it's more for people who like spending, they like being able to spend and may not be initially thinking about saving or accounting. So you can actually have these particular segmentations in terms of, on one extreme, there may be some aggressive spenders, and on another extreme, you have these very conservative savers. Regardless of who they are, what you can learn from these sequences of transactions is actually stages of people's lives over time. So sometimes you can see people, dating, dining out, right? And sometimes you can see them getting married and having kids. And guess what? There are financial services you can start providing them, like life insurance, right? So many of these sequences of events are like another language, just like our natural languages, like verbal languages, body languages, and one of the chief researchers at Visa coined the term transactional languages. So there's actually a set of analysis called transaction language understanding. Just look at someone's transactions and see what life stages they're at, what their financial maturity is, and be able to infer a lot of information about that. And that is actually something that is a process well proven in other domains. So for example, there is a billion price project from a professor at MIT where they were aggregating a lot of online prices from around the world. And they were using that to look at how price increases propagate across different industries. And you can imagine the usefulness of it, right? Stock trading, consumer price index assessments, a lot of government and financial applications there. And there are really some interesting things that they figured out there that, in time of oil price fluctuation, about 2 weeks after a step function in the price changes, the transportation industry start reacting. And about 2-3 weeks after that, you see like basic consumer goods like bread, the cost of bread increasing. You might ask, why does it take 2 weeks? You might also see something like that in the gas pumps, right? It's a similar scenario like for short spikes in price changes. Often vendors try to ride it out because they don't want to hurt their competitiveness, and they don't want to be the first one to raise prices and to lose market share, for example, or lose customers. But then, after a few weeks, their buffer runs out, and they have to increase prices to survive. So, these kind of propagations are actually everywhere in the financial transaction, the world of finance. So that's one place where you can use historic events of these, how one thing triggers another, to be able to predict and to be able to understand and adjust your strategies of your business, or adjust your strategies as an individual to be able to anticipate those trends. And then a more fun example, right? So this is like in the area of insurance. Why, insurance examples, how can they be fun? Well, this one is actually fun because this is a case shared by Yuan Qi from Ant Financial, and they had a project called the Customer DNA Project at Ant Financial. And for some of you who are not familiar with Alibaba and Ant Financial is a subsidiary of Alibaba, they sell everything. They sell clothing, food, insurance, everything, right? And because they sell everything, they had this opportunity to be able to find correlations between people's consumption characteristics in vastly different domains. And in this particular case, buying warranties for cracked screen and buying tight jeans. So apparently they found this connection that people who tend to buy tight-fitting clothing tend to drop their phones a lot. And then go online and buy cracked screen services, cracked screen fixing services. So they actually developed an insurance or warranty kind of product that specifically targets people who buy tight clothing or tight jeans. Yeah. So, and this is actually an actual product they launched, and they got actually pretty good traction in the marketplace. And it's also like a really interesting example where these kind of AI-based mapping or machine learning techniques when applied to these massive data sets, can anticipate interesting trends in the long tail that you may or may not have anticipated. So why are all these important? Well, we're not really, as financial institutions, just thinking about selling cracked screen insurance or warranties. What we're really looking for from these trends in people's financial lives is to try to find inflection points. And this is like a term that's coined for the financial industry by Andreessen Horowitz in one of their podcasts in 2016, using inflection points to overcome fintech startup distribution challenges. And what they spoke about in that podcast is that in order for new innovative financial technology companies to emerge, it's really this fight between the speed of innovation of the large firms or the incumbents and the ability for the smaller firms to acquire distribution, right? So those are the key bottlenecks. And the piece where smaller firms can acquire users fast is to find some way to look for the inflection points. And what do we mean by the inflection point? An inflection point is a trigger. It's a triggering event in a person's life. It could be a milestone, like graduation. It could be a point in time, like immigrating to the United States. Or it could be a micro moment, like making a first huge purchase and looking at your bank account with many less digits. So, it's all these different points in people's lives where people tend to be more sensitive and more open to new ideas about financial services that could be of help. And even if they don't use those financial services at the time, they could be able to keep those services in mind so that they can use those services in the future. And that is what that podcast is depositing as the key competitive advantage that financial firms, financial startups could acquire to be able to accelerate their growth in the customer acquisition domain. All right, so precision conversion from data streams. That's the second point. Let's look at the third point, exhaust data utilization. What's people's understanding of exhaust data? Anybody? What's exhaust data? Well, it's usually defined as some data that's not entirely useful for your primary business model, but somehow you may be able to leverage that in other ways, right? And in this particular case, when we're applying this concept to customer acquisition, what we're saying is that for many financial services, you're going to be acquiring a lot of interest, a lot of awareness online with your marketing campaigns. You're going to be acquiring a lot of users that start to sign up for your service, or you're acquiring their users to at least create some kind of online account to see if they can enter some information and see if they are potential customers for your services. But often, there are a large number of users, and especially in online lending, where you're trying to approve people for particular creditworthiness. And there is a majority, and sometimes over 90% of your customers who came to your site, signed up for your interface, and sometimes did some part of an application, and you determine that they're not your customers. So you have this large population where you know something about them, right? Sometimes quite deeply, you understand quite deeply who they are, but you're not monetizing them in any way. So what exhaust data utilization means is you're actually not just throwing them away and saying no, but you're trying to figure out how you can direct them to some other services that actually could be of help to them. Right? And in this particular case, for online lending, right, there is actually this particular pyramid that people in the industry may be familiar with, which is the creditworthiness of people online. So there's a lot of people who are near the bottom, right, who don't have very good credit scores. There's few people on top who has high enough earning to be very well served at the bank. But then there is this middle tier of people who needs particular services, but may not be adequately served by any one particular institution. So what this particular service, Daima, is an online app. It's actually helping people to acquire the loans when they need one. And it actually discriminates people based on some initial amount of information and be able to guide people to the appropriate portals. And you might be familiar that for online lending or for any lending, it's actually a small population service, right? So you don't borrow every day. You borrow like only when you actually need it, right? And it's actually very difficult to acquire these traffic. And it's very valuable to be able to direct people to just the right kind of services that could serve them. And they could spend less effort applying and they get higher approval rates. And one of the best things is there are many of these kind of services, there are many of these kind of techniques that's actually good for the user. Because in this case, imagine that you're just being rejected by a loan provider, right? Would you feel better if they say, hey, no, we can't help you, but these vendors may, and here's the reason why, right? So that's actually a better, user experience than many that would not have this service. Cool. So that's the third one, exhaust data utilization. And then let's talk about the other piece, the customer sustaining. This is the other side of the cycle. So first of all, for a financial services provider, the first thing is you have to be profitable, right? And for any kind of services to be sustaining, we want to make sure that you can earn a profit. And for lending purposes, it means making a fair assessment of the creditworthiness of the person. And in the US, you have the FICO score. Well, what about in China? In China, you actually have this JIMA credit score, JIMA Xinyu. And it's actually taking into account a lot more areas of information. And why does it take so much information? Well, many of you may not be familiar with the Chinese environment. Only 20% of the people actually have enough borrowing history to be able to assess a traditional credit score form at the central bank. And 80% of the people do not have enough past lending or borrowing behavior in order for people to assess a credit score for them. So you can't just not serve 80% of the population, right? So that's why there's all these other innovative ways to be able to infer creditworthiness from other areas like online, offline behavior, ability to fulfill obligations like paying your bills, as well as social network data, as well as some demographic and identity type information. But it's not just enough to collect those information. There's also a vast set of technologies that needs to be deployed with rigor at each step. And this is actually just a summary of the course I teach at Tsinghua University. We would actually literally go through one column at a time, talking about data source aggregation, source selection, feature mining, assessing and engineering the features, then doing the incremental data and label and balance handling, because hey, with any kind of successful financial services, you're going to have a lot of positive examples and a few negative examples, because you're losing a lot of money with those negative examples. And then you have various model strategies as well as result assessment, all kinds of ways to be able to make an accurate and profitable creditworthiness model. So is it enough to just be profitable as a business model? Probably not, right? There's also this area that's really important about self-protection. For self-protection, we're talking about these scenarios where when you're providing a service online through a mobile platform, many transactions are happening without a face-to-face interaction. And what that provides is ample opportunities for the hackers to use all sorts of information to fake information. And in this case, in the lending industry, it's especially bad, right? Because you're basically providing some electrons and you're getting cash. And there's a lot of incentives to defraud these entities. So there's a complete black market economy with a loose federation of specialists selling capabilities, services, and resources explicitly tailored to cyber attack for these lending institutions. So self-protection is a must. Now, there's a few ways that this is done. So first, for looking at the creditworthiness and fraud detection, at Irundai, we started this knowledge graph, and we used community detection to actually detect these cohorts of users who are high risk. And for many of you who are familiar with social networks, everybody familiar with 6 degrees of connectedness, right? What does that mean, 6 degrees?
You can know anyone, within 6 people.
Yeah, so within 6 degrees of connection, you're essentially connected to everyone in the world. And that's actually a really old estimate. And some of the newer estimates was the emergence of Facebook and WeChat, right? Your degree, the degree of connectedness has actually dropped to about 4.3. And one of the interesting characteristics about fraudsters and hackers is that the fraudster's degree of connectedness is actually around 2. Guess why? Because there are these people who are intermediaries, like agents, that connect, that are systematically defrauding these industry entities, these financial entities, right? So, in Chinese, it's like 中介, right? You find these agents to be able to help you defraud the entities. So, using community detection and knowledge graph, we're able to create this huge graph with 260 million nodes and 1 billion edges. And with that, we're able to mine these fraudsters' community in these graphs. And we're able to avoid about $30 million in fraud losses for Irundai. And then there are other cases, like the Densky Bank. This is a case where they used residual CNN architecture, the ResNet architecture, and they used 6 different layers of them and used 150 engineered features to be able to lower the false positive rate by 10 to 100x compared to the rule-based systems. And then there's also the active learning capability with PayPal, where they used a 6-layer, 600 node per layer kind of DNN, fully connected DNA architecture to be able to detect a lot of fraud situations. And then for those that are not so easy to be able to discriminate, they actually have professionals, agents, to be able to look at those and discriminate those and put that back into the model to train. So good, so you have a profitable business model, you have self-protection. What else do you need? Well, you need to have long-term trust with the customer. So let's take a look at a particular video here.
So I invited a few of the world's best hackers to try to hack me and show me where my vulnerabilities are. And now I'm going to meet them in Las Vegas for DTalk, the biggest hacker convention of the year. They're going to be using social engineering, which is essentially have any code. They just use a phone and an internet connection.
Do you want to do a sample of what you call?
What's phishing?
Phishing is voice solicitation, and basically what you do is use the phone to extract information or data points that can be used later in attack.
Let's do it. Who are you going to call?
Maybe I'll call your cell phone provider and see if I can get them to give me your email address.
I bet they're good. I bet they have my number. But yeah, go for it.
I'm going to switch from your number, so it's going to sound like it's calling from you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay? My baby. I'm sorry. My husband's like, we're about to fly from home, and then we just had a baby, and he's like, get this done by today, so I'm so sorry. But I'll call you back. I'm trying to log into our account for user information, and I can't remember what email address we used to log the account. Baby's fine. Can you help me? Awesome.
In just 30 seconds, Jessica gets access to my personal email address.
If I needed to add an order on our account so she could call in and make changes, how would I need to go about doing it? You would have to send me a speaker through the text message? Yeah. Well, the thing is, I don't think I'll be able to receive a text message if I'm on the phone. Oh. I'm not on there either. So I thought when we got married, he added me.
Jess uses my girlfriend's name and a fake social security number
5117.
to set up her personal access to my account.
Wait, I'm sorry, there's no password on my account right now. Can I set that up?
She even gets the support person to change my password.
Thank you so much for your help today.
So she just basically blocked me with my account.
I'll get her that. Alright, thank you.
Holy shit. So they gave you access to my entire cell phone.
You're gonna have to go on and change your password. Yes, my name.
And all it took was a crying baby and a phone call.
How about that sinking for a moment? Right. So, in this age of internet finance, there's still a lot of touch points. That's non-technology, right? That's sometimes so much easier to hack than the technology piece. But there's help from AI, right? We're talking about AI opportunities, so there got to be some help from AI. Well, there's this thing called chatbot, right? That is now becoming more and more advanced and more usable, user-friendly. And one of the things about chatbots is that they will not violate any privacy protocol, regardless of how you try to fake anything around them, right? So there's a lot of actually pretty secure technologies, some of them like from startup companies like Assisto, who were started by this set of entrepreneurs who initially developed the Apple Series product. And then there's also now AI, also the Google technology. So that's definitely something that you can use to be able to do personalization and intelligent services. Good, so now we've gone through the 6 different opportunities. Let's just conclude with we're talking about internet finance and using mobile technologies to help user. And the mission is democratization of personalized financial services whenever and wherever they're needed. Then we talk about 2 cycles, the customer acquisition cycle and the customer sustaining cycle. Because of these market trends of high growth to saturating market in the the mobile device industry, as well as the transactional to relationship-based engagement in the financial industry. And the 6 opportunities, the usage of mobile data, the inflection points, the multi-conversion process with exhaust data utilization, assessment of things like credit risk for profitability, self-protection with anti-fraud, as well as long-term trust by protecting your data. And hopefully with all that technology, we're able to provide these services that is working for the best financial well-being of the customer. Thank you.
Hello, anyone has any questions regarding to the presentations? Okay.
Yeah, you mentioned in China everybody is getting barcode. Why is not doing here? What's the reason?
So can you repeat the question? Everybody is doing what?
Paying with barcode, scanning.
Paying with barcode. Yes. So the question is why everybody in China is paying with barcode and not here? Well, that's actually a really deep question. So I'm referring to like one of the point of views of one of the ex-CTO over here in Dai. He's had a lot deeper thought in that area than I have, right? So the usage of 2D barcode actually preceded the utilization of that technology in the financial industry a long time ago, actually. So, and that technology has proliferated in China before the mobile payment piece, right? Now, when mobile payment appeared, there is actually a lot of different events that happened that helped them proliferate for that particular usage domain. The short answer is that yeah, it's a convergence of multiple trends, industry trends, with mobile technology as well as 2D barcodes in any other usage scenario, not just for finance, so that now, like for payment, it became a very condensed way of passing information. And mind you, there is actually quite a lot of security risks in that form of payment as well. So you may have heard, may or may not have heard, that there are people who go around parking lots and putting these slips, fake parking tickets, on people's dashboard with 2D barcode on them. And with a 2D barcode, it's very hard to verify, who you're sending the money to, right? Because you don't recognize a particular URL. This is like the ultimate phishing process, right? So there's actually a lot of fraud that's happening using 2D barcode as a payment gateway or technology for payment.
So how do they deal with this kind of fraud?
How do you deal with this kind of fraud?
How do China deal with this fraud?
Well, it's really customer awareness, right? I mean, how do you deal with fraud in the United States when you're receiving emails from African princes, right? So there's really no way to prevent these things from happening other than education for the masses and to be aware that those fraudulent pathways exist. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I have two questions. In my slides, you showed there are a lot of web-based online financial institutions, just like Sifei, Huanbei, right? A lot of small, financial institutions, web-based online financial institutions. Do you compare, these web-based financial institutions with Chinese typical bank, just like Hongzhang Yinhang, Renmin Yinhang? About these web-based financial institutions' bad debt failure rate, or how much premium interest rate is charged with the customers?
Yes. So the question is, there were a lot of Chinese small startups, financial institutions, right? Yeah. In one of the slides, and how does the default rate would compare with the central banks or like any big banks default rate? So yeah, the default rate is definitely higher, but there's actually two sides to that equation. So if you're talking about accessible finance, right, you're going to be reaching those people or those cohorts that have less ability to pay, but hopefully still the willingness to repay, right? So having a high interest rate is not a bad thing. It means that you can reach more people who may not have been able to demonstrate their ability to repay, right? So yes, their default rate is higher, but they also have a higher interest rate to be able to make it a profitable business model. In fact, some of the payday loan entities in the United States has the highest margins, right? So the key is for you to be able to take controlled risk as a lender and be able to make that a profitable business model. Now, there is actually a really similar kind of discussions that is probably more pertinent to the United States about student loan, like the huge amount of debts that people accumulate for student loans, right? And there's a lot of reports on, hey, you know, it's so bad, these student loans cost so much, and then, you know, it's a debt that like a lot of people cannot repay after they graduate, right? So we should get rid of these, or like we should not have these. And there's actually this one regulation that for student loan, it can't be forgiven, that debt can't be forgiven, even in bankruptcy, right? So why do you think those things are there? So, you know, at the beginning, like, I also thought, hey, that's like a not very good financial product. But after thinking about it a little bit, if you think about it from another perspective, that's actually a really good thing that it exists. And why? Because when people do not have the knowledge yet, right, like when they haven't gone to school, haven't gone through those education opportunities yet, it's really uncertain whether they can repay the loan or not. For any financial institution, if they have to take that risk, right, and that there's this bankruptcy thing that you can do, just, you know, out of the blue and all your debt is forgiven. Think how much interest you have to charge in order to protect, in order to have a profitable business model, right? The interest rate is probably pretty high. So like, having it not to be forgivable even at bankruptcy, that's actually a way to lower the interest rate and still make these kind of loans profitable and available, right? And especially when, you know, during the period of your education, the 2 to 4 years, you don't have any ability to repay because you're not earning any money. So your interest is actually curing all that time, right? And so like a high interest rate means such bad things for these loans that probably nobody would be able to afford to do that. So now let's like fast forward to, you know, after these people get the education. Some will be able to get good paying jobs, some won't. It's just a fact of life, right? And hopefully everybody's motivated to have a good paying job to be able to pay back their student loan. Now, there are some people who have really good educations, got really good jobs. There are actually a lot of vendors, entities like SoFi, Earnest, LendKey, that are in the business of being able to reduce the interest rate and refinance those student loans once people have gotten out of school. Think about that. That's actually a really good thing, right? I mean, you know, you think that they have the social responsibility to, you know, save people money and refinance those loans. But actually, think about it. They're actually picking the cream of the crop. Those people who can pay back their loans to be able to reduce their interest rate. So that's a good thing, yes. But what about all the other people who cannot pay back, right? Or who have these as burden? So actually, there is a massive amount of population who may not be able to lower their interest rate as much. So there are actually companies like LendKey that have a different system or a different kind of funding model to allow them to be able to service a broader set of audience. So, you know, any kind of things that you see often in the news, if you think about the customer acquisition and customer retention or sustaining kind of models, and try to understand why those entities are there and why those policies are there, is that you can start to understand a lot more about how the world operates. Does that help?
So,
have a seat, please.
Okay.
Yeah, I have this one. Hello. Oh. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Zhong, for the really great presentation. So let's move on to the second part, which is the fireside conversation between Dr. Chong and me. So I have to introduce about myself. My name is Kei. I work for Document Data, and And I think Dr. Trump is the old friend for talking data. So we're gonna have like several conversations, and you can ask questions anytime when you have. Okay? Thank you.
Hope you can be louder because.
Okay.
Louder.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So you talked in the presentation about the 6 stages of the 2 cycles. So which one is the most difficult to implement it during the 4?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Which one is the most difficult to implement?
Yeah.
Actually, for different companies at different stages, they are of different difficulty, right? So just comparing the 2 cycles. At the beginning of the company, right, customer acquisition is definitely the more difficult cycle. Since you're growing, nobody knows you, and doing that customer acquisition cycle well is really important to be able to have that user base to be able to sustain, right? And even at the growth stage, sustaining is important to be able to justify a good company valuation, because that's the metric a lot of VCs would look at, right? The difference between
how you can earn money from it,
right? Facebook and MySpace, right? The growth and sustaining. So definitely that's important. But throughout the process, now that there is actually innovative ways that companies are putting together, not just operating those cycles, but building innovative business models with those cycles. So, for example, at Acorns, we are able to reach a lot of customers with a simple idea of you can save your changes and invest for your financial future in the stock market so that you can actually see it grow over time. That simple idea gets a lot of people in the door, but really, saving the change is not enough to have a good retirement. But it is a way on top of which we can build a lot of other financial services that can be introduced to the customers so that they can iteratively save a little bit more, sometimes even without changing their purchasing behavior, right? So that's a way to really taking the exhaust data idea to the extreme, where we're introducing a lot of new services to them within our umbrella rather than introducing them to other partners.
Yeah, thank you. So, so what do you think? What is the future trend towards the fintech industry? Any new applications like blockchain?
Yes. So there is definitely a lot of cool technologies that people are looking at, like blockchain. Yeah. Definitely a huge
about that.
Technology. Yes. Yeah. Now, depending on different financial environment and national environment, or just markets, right? Yeah. Any technology, when it's successful, it has to solve specific fundamental problems or bottlenecks, right? So if you're looking at the egalitarian type of ideals that there shouldn't be a centralized entity controlling monetary policies, yes, Bitcoins and all the blockchain-based currencies do fulfill that role. But how important is it? And is it able to be actually able to help protect people the way central banks protect populations? It's actually not that clear, right? But there are other aspects of financial services, like tracking and authentication, and many other aspects that may be be greatly helped by these new technologies like blockchain. So I think the jury is still out which particular space or which particular piece of the industry can be helped with these technology, but definitely, nobody really knew what internet would do for commerce and social networks 30 years ago, right? So we just have to see what particular business model emerges.
Yeah, Yeah, just like I use the Meet for my self account, management. So there's one more thing we concern about is how to protect our personal information, like how to protect like account information, because we provide it to the second party, the agent to help us manage our assets. So that's kind of like scary if someone know how much money I have. Yeah. So is there any like new technology, AI methods regarding to this information security?
Yeah, so information security, that's definitely really, really important, right? And it's often scary, like some entity knows so much about us, right? But if you look at it on the other hand, right? 30, 40 years ago, if you want to enjoy such service of someone guiding you through life, right? Helping you figure out how you earn money for 40 years and live on it for 80 years, right? You need to pay someone a lot of money to do that, right? And that person, if you want some good advice from him or her, right? They will need to know everything about you too, right? And they will probably have an office with a cabinet that contains all that information, and the lock on their door may not be all that secure, and the glass in their window may not be double pane, right? So if someone really wants to break in, they would have a much easier job than breaking into a high security server center to be able to steal your data today, right? And now you can have all that at much cheaper cost, like Acorns, $1 a month, you can get all that, right? So it's really in comparison. And also on the other hand, like there's also a lot of privacy and concerns about healthcare data, right? But think about how much you tell your doctor, right? If you're really feeling bad, you'd be telling her or him everything about you, right? Yeah. And you would even let them do whatever they need to do to stop the pain. So, it's really dependent on the scenario and how much help that a particular service would be able to provide you. And it's really just a trade-off of how much you give up to get what kind of services in return.
Okay, thank you so much. And I just say you give us a really great example how people can access their accounts through the live assistant. So you're talking about the chatbot, but sometimes chatbot is one, it cannot provide everything. So how to deal with that?
Absolutely. So everything is a trade-off, right? So chatbot definitely cannot provide all the possible service that you can think of, but it can handle a lot, right? So one of the pieces of statistics, Yuan Qi, like the executive from Ant Financial, mentioned that they have this 11/11, like the Double 11 holiday, like in China. It's promoted by Alibaba, and they have amazing amount of sales, like hundreds of, like tens of billions of yuan, like sales in 24 hours. And you can imagine how much customer service volume that there would be. People put in the wrong shipping address, misclicked and changed and this and that. But once when they were deploying these chatbot type technologies, they were able to handle a lot of simple cases and cut down on those volumes and reduce wait times and provide a better user experience and make the whole service scalable. So all that really hits the bottom line in terms of how much margin they need to retain in order to serve you better. Right? So yes, chatbot can't do everything, but it can help you save money eventually.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's right. Because when I'm using the Alibaba, the Taobao, I found there are several frequent asked questions. You can easily find the answer from that. Yeah, but sometimes we also, just like for example, when I call the customer service, I just hate to talk to the robots. I like to talk to representative because sometimes it's just like what the video said. I need to like explain the complicated information, just make sure they understand what I'm talking about. So sometimes this kind of like complicated situation, it's more easier to have like information bridge.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes,
that's
definitely.
because the chatbot can only solve the simple questions. But sometimes the reality is more complicated than that.
And another way to think about it is, though, is different customer service with different amount of training may or may not solve your most complicated questions as well, right? And if people saw the Google I/O demo about the chatbot, well, it's just a matter of time, right?
Okay, so another question, what are the advantages and disadvantages of applying AI to every part of financial business model compared with the traditional one?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, AI is often spoken about in its like shorthand, right? 2 letters, but it's really artificial intelligence, right? And the fundamental part here is the intelligence part. So, let's talk about what is intelligence, right? And to me, intelligence is that you can make the right decision given all the necessary information, right? Just playing chess, you know the board, playing Go, you know the board, you know the rules, and you can make the best decision. But then I want to distinguish that with wisdom, right? So what's the difference between intelligence and wisdom? Well, I would consider wisdom is the ability to make the right decision with incomplete information, right? So AI can help you make the decision, a lot of decisions, even today, when you have complete information. But there are key business decisions that one has to make with incomplete information. That can only be done by human and their past experiences.
Yeah, so you think compare with like this traditional financial companies or the financial methods, for example, you can using the AI to decide which stock need to buy in or sell out. So you think like maybe in different segment of the financial part, you think which part is more easier to be changed by the AI, and which part more need to be used the traditional way or the human involved?
Yeah. So the line I would draw is any situation where we would have seemingly complete information. And often those situations are short time horizon situations where elements of influence are pretty controlled or pretty observable, and general events tend to be flat, right, or non-changing over that short time horizon. So typical scenarios would be high frequency trading, right? The stock market doesn't change like in terms of the grander scheme of things that much, but you can focus on specific stocks and specific industries under specific conditions and make a decision about trading. And in customer acquisition, it could be, like user acquisition with any kind of ad tech technology, right? You're looking at the way people would be looking at an ad or looking at a message and be able to make an instantaneous decision on whether to engage or not. Excuse me. And so those are the places, short-term time horizon decision-making processes that are easy to influence with the availability of AI. So what are the places where it makes it hard? Well, anytime you're dealing with a government policy, right? Especially today, not just in China anymore, in the US as well, right? That there's a lot of factors influencing particular policy decisions over a long horizon of time. That's just really hard for AI to understand, and even difficult for non-AIs to us to comprehend. And then in specifically the financial industry, anytime when you're looking at the long-term trustworthiness of people, the long-term habits that you will want people to form or to be able to detect, Those are the places that's really hard for AI. But luckily, there's this new domain called behavioral economics, right? Richard Thaler is the person who won the Nobel Prize in economics last year with his research on behavioral economics. And he's actually one of the advisors for Acorns as well. Yeah, so any kind of those areas where we're trying to bring these considered decision-making process and shifting those to the instantaneous decision process is one set of knowledge base that we're leveraging to bring these seemingly long time horizon decision processes closer to the short-term decision processes to be able to better use AI to assist in guiding users to perform certain actions or form certain habits that's good for their financial wellness.
Okay. So actually the last question is from our Slack community. They ask, for which common fintech tasks the traditional statistical model overperform the neural network, and on which, can some of the neural network methods issue can be solved by the traditional machine learning methods? So just a comparison of the, machine learning traditional and neural network in fintech.
Yes, in fintech. So actually fintech is a great example, right? Because a lot of the data that we use in fintech are very much diverse in their nature, right? So you could be using some transaction information, which is pretty standard. You could be using some clickstream data to look at what people are interested in or is thinking about, how they display their what they would like to do through the click streams that they look at the news articles or YouTube videos, for example. And their online and offline behaviors, like I talked about earlier, the geo information about where they've been and where they are right now. So where traditional techniques tend to be better is aggregating a lot of very diverse set of data where there's still a lot of feature engineering that's involved, and it's not so trivial, or techniques have not been well developed to fit them into a neural network input layer. So those areas where traditional techniques would be potentially superior to neural network models. And in other domains where the input is relatively monotonic, like pictures, like looking at images and having instantaneous decision that you need to make about the content or some properties about that image, either it's people, faces, right, or items or entities, like in self-driving. Those are really good. Neural networks can be very good.
Yeah, great, thank you. So I think I have all my questions here. So anyone has other questions, you can feel free to ask. Okay, please.
Just one question. Thank you for sharing first. My question is on the model for reliability. Especially in the financial industry, the reliability is critical. Do you comment especially for the deep neural networks, what kind of best practice currently in your mind? Thank you.
Can you repeat the question because
yes. So the question is, if I'm repeating correctly, let me know, that in the financial domain, like what would be the safeguard for the reliability of these models when you're using a deep neural network, right? Yeah, so really what we're talking about in terms of safeguard, potentially like human explainability or particular artifacts that are in these deep neural network that is susceptible to poisoning, like data poisoning or other kind of techniques, right, to ruin the discriminative power of these neural networks. First I'll just handle the explainability piece. So there are actually techniques that, for example, there is a technique of LIME, right? Locally interpretable model agnostic explanations. where it is the technique where you can, you may not be able to interpret what a neural network will be deciding on all situations, but if you look at one particular decision it is making, you can give it many similar kind of samples and see when it suddenly decides to be yes or no, 1 or 0, right? And to have extrapolate a linear decision surface at that location to be able to have an explanation with a few key variables that is that has great weight in explaining what the model outcome is. So all that is pretty complex in technical terms, but in everyday terms, it's actually really simple. It's a technique that fraudsters have been using for years. So they just take someone's, say, loan application data, right? Change a few components of it, right? And apply again. Change a few components of it, apply again, and see when they get through. And once they get through, they see, if I change these variables, I don't get through. If I change the other variables, I do get through. So they start figuring out what your decision surface is, right? So it's the same exact approach. Some professors here in the West Coast, in Washington University, and in SoCal, they figured out a more algorithmic way of doing this in more generalized form. So they put together this line algorithm to be able to do that. So that's the first explainable piece. And the second piece is the safeguard piece. Well, that's really hard, right? And for everybody who has taught or had kids, the selection of training sample is highly important, right? When a little kid learns a bad habit, it's really hard to remove. And so, that's a constant challenge in terms of what training data you would have and how do you prevent poisoning of the training data to get to a bad decision.
Thank you. So,
I have a question about how you monitor this kind of fraudulent behavior or users using the algorithm you mentioned, how to prevent it from happening.
Yeah. So the question is, how do we monitor fraudulent behavior in that case? Yeah. So it's actually really hard, right? Mainly because fraudulent behaviors, when they're isolated cases, you don't have past behavior to measure against or learn from. When there are systematic cases, those new approaches for defrauding a system may come all at once, and it can cause a lot of damages or a lot of loss, right, for a lending institution. So luckily, for the organized case, when they come at once, right, there are a lot of ways to identify similarities in those cases, because often the fraudsters would have figured out a particular way through some testing or some insider information that they would be putting in a lot of applications and get a lot of fraudulent cases out. So there are commonalities one can detect, right? But it really means that you have to look at the commonalities in a variety of ways, like the IP address that they come in, the geolocation similarities, similarities in the type of devices, similarities in some patterns in the application process, or even timing of the time that it takes to go from one step to another. Sometimes it often uses this amount of time, and for fraudsters, because they have to get through a lot of applications in a short amount of time, and they're really fluent, if you would, with the frauding process at some point, and they would use different amount of time, right? So a lot of those capabilities, you can detect patterns in there to figure out the crowd, the big cases. For the small cases, well, you just hope that there's not a lot of them, so because there's really no automatic way to detect them. And luckily, many of these lending platforms, they have been through a lot of these techniques. So they've already built up the wall high enough so that the isolated cases, they do not have enough technology to overcome those walls.
Yeah. Thank you. So, yeah, please.
So in one of the slides you mentioned about the inflection point.
Yes.
And you mentioned that the startup can use it, and so they can acquire the customers easier, faster, right? So does it need a lot of customer data in order to understand the inflection point?
Yes, absolutely. So the question is, talking about the inflection point, you need a lot of data to be able to detect the inflection point.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's why when you want to be looking at the inflection point, you can either collect the data yourself or use third-party data, right? So a lot of the advertising platforms, they have a lot of this data because people hit a lot of applications, on their cell phone, on their PCs, their laptops, and they have a lot of continued behavior collected from those centralized players in the industry. And there is actually a company called Symbio that is actually looking at a lot of those streams of data and be able to detect many of the inflection points for this. At the same time, there are other business models like Acorns, right? So we use these services that we provide to help people save their changes. And in the process, in order for us to provide that automated service, we need you to link your bank accounts and your credit card account so that we know when to do the automatic roundup and to do those investments for you automatically. Because we're offering that service as a side product of that, we do see people's transactions. And we're actually seeing in 2008 about $100 billion of transactions that people have. And through those data streams, we're able to find these key inflection points and be able to provide a lot of services for our customers at just the right time, even before they notice they might need it. And that's the power of detecting inflection points and to be able to provide people with the services they want or need.
Okay, so any questions?
Yes. What's a good example of an inflection point? Like when somebody's going to get married, you can detect that? Is that
Yes, so what's a good example of an inflection point, right? So when we say inflection point, many people may think about this as a precise moment in the point of time, right? Either is this hour, next hour, this day, or next day, right? In fact, the inflection point may or may not be that precise, right? So think about many people with kids, right? There are a lot of people with kids, but not all that many people with life insurance, right? So there is actually a whole years of open window when you can notice someone has kids and whether they would be in the decision process of buying life insurance. So, and also, for auto insurance, right? So anybody has a car would be open to buy auto insurance, and usually people renew every 6 months. So there's this window of time of 2 to 3 months, or maybe 1 to 2 months, where you'll be open to be hearing about how you can save for your next period of auto insurance.
So, okay.
Very interesting question.
Yes.
And so in the financial industry, one company may applies AI technology to do that, but also some other companies or the hackers of this company, maybe they also can use the AI technology to specific to just treat for this AI technology of this company. So how the company just to treat these situations so that they can still make profits or just sustain their services.
So
barrier.
Yeah.
Just like the technology barrier.
Yes, the technology barrier, right? So the question is, you have large companies and small companies. Anybody can use technology. So why is there a barrier, right? So this gets to a much deeper question about business model and how organizations have evolved and what the cultures of the organizations are and what the processes of organizations are. And there's this really interesting example of, if you think about Amazon versus Walmart, right? Typical example. Walmart with Walmart.com doesn't equal Amazon, right? And the key place there is like how people work. Is there a fast iteration cycle? So, like people often think about, these gaming business as playing Go, right? For those of you who are familiar with or not familiar with the game of Go, you have this big board, 361 positions, 19 by 19 board, and every turn, everyone can put down one piece, and you got white piece and black pieces. So think about this. If a company has a product iteration cycle that is measured in days rather than months, essentially you're able to put down multiple pieces while your opponent can only put on one piece. And think about what that means for a game of Go, right? You have an overwhelming advantage. And that's like where a lot of the internet companies or internet business models come in. It's not really just about the technology, but also about the business model, the iteration cycle for product development. And sometimes, and as you see from, this starts showing my age, right? For video cassette recorders, right? Betamax did not overcome VHS, right? Because it's how fast you can deploy it versus how good the technology is, right? So basically, a lot of iteration cycles, a lot of reach for your customer acquisition piece, so that you have that user base that you could sustain in the other cycle, and that would basically help you have a successful business model in financial institutions or otherwise.
Okay, so I think it's about time. It's all for tonight. Thank you, Dr. Trump. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you for your time. Yeah, and this is our first episode, and we're gonna have a second episode next month. So we invited the top instructor from Udemy, who fly from Australia to Silicon Valley. So that is a really great speaker for the next month. So I hope you're enjoying tonight, and will also join us next month. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, by the way, if you want to have the PPT slides, and also we record the video, so you can scan the QR code outside on our banner, and you can join our Slack community, and we can share everything with you. Thank you.
What's